For my next project, I'm going to be making a Halloween costume for my bear, my unfinished bear, but everybody deserves a costume. To be exact, I'm going to be making a jack skeleton head that is going to go over the bear's head. So I've been doing papier-mâché since I was a kid. I feel like it's one of those projects where you can find the materials easily around your house if you're a creative child without having to spend money, which most kids don't have. So the traditional way that I learned how to make papier-mâché was with Elmer's glue and just water, usually a 1-to-1 sort of mixture. As I got older and some of the projects I made grew in scale, the Elmer's glue becomes not very cost effective. That bottle wasn't super expensive. I think it was like $4, but still, if you're doing 1-to-1 on a big project, you'll go through a couple of those. So I switched over to flour and water. And the flour works absolutely fabulous. It works great. I felt like it hardens better than the glue sometimes. And it's obviously much cheaper. That 5-pound bag of flour, I think, was $1.40. But when I was kind of looking up stuff to do, I originally settled on I was just going to buy a white yoga ball for this and then modify it. But a white yoga ball was like $30. So I kind of thought of papier-mâché, and some recipes that I saw, which I'd never heard of, use this liquid starch as well as the flour. And they say the starch creates a harder surface, which would be good for something that's going outside, as well as it dries quicker. So after a little bit of research, I found this recipe online by this guy who does amazing papier-mâché. It's mostly Halloween themed papier-mâché, and I'll put a link in the description. And he uses a combination of the 3 of these. So that is what I'm going to do. He also gives you a recipe for making papier-mâché pulp, which is more of like a clay sort of material that uses slightly different ingredients, plus these as well. I think you add in joint compound. But regardless, that is the recipe I'm using. And I'm going to be putting it around a gigantic beach ball instead of using the yoga ball. The giant beach ball I got off Amazon for around $10, super cost effective. It will be a nice armature to make this head around, and if I put the nozzle at the bottom of the head, since there's going to be quite a large hole there in order to fit over the bear's head, I can hypothetically deflate the ball and then reuse it. I have 2 nephews that I wouldn't mind giving it to, and they could kind of do what they want with it, because these cheaper beach balls, the reviews across the board pretty much said they don't last very long. So this is a 48-inch beach ball, and if you've never bought beach balls on Amazon before, I kind of learned quite quickly that the measurement system for beach balls on Amazon is completely wrong, so don't follow it. So this one's is supposed to be a 48-inch beach ball, and what people in the comments were saying was companies measured the deflated ball. So it's actually longer when it's deflated than when it has air in it and stretches out. And I just measured mine, and mine's only like 42. So it's not even close to 48 inches at any measurement whatsoever. And then supposedly when this one blows up, it's going to shrink to only about 30 to 32 inches, which is perfect for what I want. I didn't want a huge ball, but I think that's something to consider if you're going to be using these to make anything really. This is actually a copy of original artwork from Tim Burton of some beginning drawings of Jack Skellington, and this is pretty much the face I'm going for. I haven't fully committed to making an open smiled mouth. It's really going to depend on the sort of time frame I'm working with, so that's why I chose a photo that has a closed smile. The eyes will be recessed, but to start the ball, I'm just going to completely cover this, and then if you've ever worked with papier-mâché, it's really easy to manipulate during use, but also once it is dried, so I could cut out parts if I have to. So before I finally start mixing this stuff up, and I printed out the recipe, but I'm going to put a link to that website in my description. We're looking at 6 cups of flour to 1 cup liquid starch to 1 cup white glue, and then you kind of add water till it gets to a thin pancake batter-like consistency. He was using a power drill to mix it, and I have one of those, but I'm just going to try a whisk. This bucket's a little small for one of those. It will make a huge mess. I'm only measuring out the flour. The liquid ingredients, I don't want to mess up my cup, so I'm just going to guesstimate that, and then obviously add the warm water until it gets to the consistency. I always use newspaper for my papier-mâché. I've always read that you're supposed to rip it because the rough edges actually make a smoother surface. For this, I'm going to start with probably 2 or 3 layers of the flour. If you put on all of the surface at once, it's going to take forever to dry. It takes a long amount of time to dry, at least I think in general, this method. So if you put it on too thick, sometimes it won't dry. It will take over a week. It will still be damp. I've done that before. So after that, I'm fairly convinced blowing up this ball is going to be the hardest and worst part of this process. But now that it's done, I kind of took some rough measurements off the wall, and it barely breaks 30 inches in any dimension. So I'm going to mix up my papier-mâché and start putting strips on this. And I'm pretty much going to go down to where this yellow line stops, because in order to get on that bear head, I'm going to need a very big opening, and I'll probably at some point have to split it in the back as well. But roughly, I think to that yellow line will be good. Ball set up in a corner of my shop that's somewhat out of the way, and the reason I use that New York Post is because since it opens more like a book than a traditional newspaper, you can easily rip it very quickly and get a ton of long strips, which is what I need to cover the surface of this ball. The strips that you make should kind of be relative to the size object you're making. Smaller strips would take so much longer to do on this, whereas these longer strips might not be great for something much smaller. I just kind of have them set out on a board here. This gets really messy really quick, and if you don't have them already kind of pre-spread out, they're just going to want to stick together once your fingers get that batter on them. So there's that first round of the ball, and the thing in the video was I worked from the top down, and I'm going to put a second layer on it, and I'll probably work from the bottom up that time. And the big thing with this is I wanted to make sure I overlapped all my pieces, so technically there's just about 2 layers I would say on this whole thing since everything's overlapped. So now I'm just going to leave it in that corner and let it dry. If you've never done papier-mâché before, one thing to consider is you are fighting against gravity for a little bit as this dries. So the areas you want to keep an eye on are going to be right at where this starts to curve at the bottom. You'll kind of get puddles there sometimes because if you are heavy with putting the mixture on, it will drip down the sides, and sometimes this will loosen from the ball. So for the first couple hours, I'll just keep checking on it and make sure that area stays clean. So hopefully this dries. It's Wednesday now. Halloween's not until next Wednesday. So if worse comes to worse, I technically have a week. I'd like to get it up there on Monday. This weekend it's supposed to rain, and even though I'm going to paint this, I'm not going to throw it out there if it's going to be pouring rain. As far as the consumption of my materials, I would say I used up about definitely 1 newspaper and probably the half of the other one, so I needed 2, and I'll have to get more for the next layer. That is how much papier-mâché is left. So that recipe was perfect for covering this ball. There's really no waste. Now this stuff will keep for a certain amount of time. It'll say on that website how long it will keep. I never keep it, but if you do want to make up a bunch and then put it in your fridge, I think it lasts for a couple days. So besides having enough to cover my ball, for those of you that want to know, it filled up just about, I would say probably 3/4 of this bucket. This bucket doesn't have a liquid measure on it, but I would say it's probably around the area of a gallon worth of liquid. And the water I ended up using was about 1 filled to just above the B, and 3/4 of these, and these are 32-ounce water mixing cups. But again, depending on the amount of ingredients you put in there, that might fluctuate a little bit, but just to give you a rough idea of what I used. This is the next day, and it's mostly dry. You'll notice it gets dry because the paper will turn almost like a bone white. You can see how white it is compared to this one spot at this top that's still a little wet. I think it's okay. I'm still going to put the second layer on this morning. You should really be waiting for this to be dry all around, but I think if I wait too long, I won't be able to finish it in time. So with that one dry spot, if I put the second coat, and I might put a third coat on, I'm going to see tomorrow how everything goes, then I could always deflate the ball and put my dryer on the inside and really finish drying it out. So the part that's not still wet, the sides, when you press on them, they're going to have a little bit of give because it's only 2 layers of paper, but you'll notice it starts to feel somewhat hard. I do the exact same thing I did yesterday, mix up some mix, only this time I'm going to probably start from the bottom and work my way up. And I have a new newspaper, and this time around I think what I'm going to do is make the strips a little bit wider. Since the ball is circular, you don't want super wide strips, otherwise, especially where you have the ridges in the ball, it'll be hard to go over it. But the thin strips were a little too thin. I could probably get away with twice as wide, and it will make putting them on just go a little bit faster. So once again, it's the next morning, and the sides have dried very nicely. It's pretty rigid now. This part was where the rim of the vacuum container kind of messed it up, but I'm going to be trimming the bottom anyway. So I'm going to do the same thing I did yesterday. I'm going to start with the working from the bottom up because that top part has the most papier-mâché on it. It has a lot more layers than the sides. And I decided to do 3 layers, mainly because I did a little reading last night of people that make a lot of papier-mâché, and the consensus seems to be anything balloon sized, you could get away with 2 layers. Things that are bigger, you should put more on, just because of the size of it. It has more of a tendency to, once you take that center armature out, it can collapse. So I'm just going to put the 3rd layer on it because now it's Friday morning. This should be dry enough to start putting the features on it tomorrow. Wider strips worked much better than the thinner strips, and before I start, I break them all up and put them in a bucket, which is an extremely easy way to transfer them to the mix and then onto the ball. For the top, I have a bigger newspaper that I'm going to put on the top just to kind of save some time because, like I said, the top already has the most layers on it. So I'm going to mix up another batch the exact same way I've been doing, and this is the last of my flour. It's about a 1/2 cup shy, but I don't think that will matter. So that bag of flour, that 5-pound bag of flour gave me 3 decent sized batches to cover that ball, and I still had plenty of glue and plenty of the liquid starch left over, so that's not a problem. And like I said, in my shop, the temperature has been around 50 degrees. At nighttime, it's been sinking lower, and this has been taking about a day to dry. And that's with putting, I don't have the fan on it the whole time, just in the beginning to kind of give it a head start. Overnight, I definitely don't have the fan on. And that's the 40 to 50 degree temperature range. If I was doing this in the summertime, this could potentially set up in a few hours. So just things to think about if you want to do something like this in the colder weather where you don't have a good heat source. Like, I'm not going to bring this in my house. It will take a good 24 hours for each layer to fully dry. To put them on, I'm only at, I think each layer easily takes under an hour to do. So the time commitment of that is not huge. The time commitment is waiting for it to dry. So here's my ball. It's still not fully dry, mainly because yesterday I wasn't really in the shop, so I wasn't going to run the heater while I wasn't in here, so it definitely took a lot longer to dry. I believe it's dry enough to at least take the ball out, and then I think it will, since the air will be able to circulate on the inside as well as the outside, I think it will dry a little faster. And I want to start roughing out the face because it's now Saturday, so I kind of have to get the features on tomorrow if I want it dry enough by Monday to paint it. Halloween's still not until Wednesday, but I would like it up there a couple days. So I think what I'm going to do is deflate that ball enough to pull it out and then see how everything is. The biggest concern with taking your armature out before the papier-mâché is fully dry is that it could collapse in on itself, especially such a big structure. However, the consecutive layers I put on were pretty dry, so I think I'm going to be okay in that regard. This is where I'm at. I didn't film any of this because it took a while to get to this spot. This was definitely a little too wet to take out of that beach ball, but if I didn't start drying it from the inside, it was never going to dry. So I have my fan set up in there, and I'm hoping to get this dry enough before I call it a day that it can be workable tomorrow. I had to put a string around it. It doesn't want to really collapse as much as it doesn't want to keep its circular shape. And then I deflated the balloon, which was a pain in the butt because since it's such a cheap balloon, the little plastic stop they have on the little nozzle there just didn't want to stay open, so I ended up cutting it out completely. This is actually working really well because I have this fan set to the temperature gauge of 99 degrees and it keeps kind of shutting off, which means the entire temperature inside that ball is hot enough to trigger that stop. This is kind of all in place here. These little rips in the side actually happened from trying to take that balloon out because, like I said, it just didn't want to come out because of that faulty nozzle. But I finally got it out of there and I deflated it enough so that this could sit in there and it will keep that curved shape because it's sitting in the somewhat deflated balloon. I also now put 2 stretchers in there to keep that mouth open, and it's drying really quick because it's so warm in here because the air is staying trapped inside the ball. Hopefully an hour or so like this, and then overnight, and it will be ready to go by tomorrow, but I'll have to see.